Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and normally I'm joined by these two knuckleheads, Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
But we are graced this episode with a new knucklehead. Introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, thank you, man. I've already made knucklehead status. That's how I made it. My name is Patrick Strait. I'm the author of the book Funny Thing About Minnesota, which is the rise, fall, and rebirth of Twin Cities stand-up comedy.
Awesome. Well, where can people find the book?
Yeah, I mean, the book is, if you're local to Minnesota, it's in all the bookstores, everybody from the small independents to your Barnes and Nobles. It's through the Minnesota Historical Society Press. So our Historical Society has it there. You can order through their website, or you can give Big Daddy Bezos your money. You can just go through Amazon.
You can build another spaceship or something like that.
Exactly.
Well, I will say there are a couple of occasions that help support this topic. And one is April is National Comedy Month, if you believe these calendars, and April 28th is Clean Comedy Day, and that ties into our topic, which is the Mount Rushmore of clean comedy. And I guess I'll bring this up with our guests. Sometimes people mistake clean comedy for, I think, weak comedy or family comedy or kids comedy, but I don't think that's the case. Do you think so, Patrick?
No, I mean, I'll admit I'm just as guilty as some of those other people. Like, there's times I think when somebody describes themselves as a clean comic, I always kind of make that subconscious leap where I'm like, oh, okay, so this is going to be a lot of dad jokes and it's going to be a lot of, just kind of cornball type stuff. But no, you're right. I mean, I think, when you look at some of the biggest comics that are still out there, guys like Jim Gaffigan and things like that, they're clean comics and they're playing arenas. And I think you've got, groups like Dry Bar Comedy, which is out in, I believe they're based out of Utah, and they have their own YouTube channel and they put out albums and all this stuff. And they've really kind of opened up everybody's eyes to, just how much really good, really quality, clean stand-up comedy there is out there. And the other thing too is, I think, and you guys, I'm sure we'll get into this and we'll probably debate this a little bit, but I think the idea of what is clean comedy is also something that, it's up for debate. It's up for discussion, right? I mean, is it just you don't swear? Is it just that, you don't talk about adult topics? Is it one or the other or both? So I think that's a big part of it too. It's funny, and I'm just going to start shamelessly plugging my book right away. There's a guy who was big in the original days of the Twin Cities stand-up scene named Bill Bauer, who was known as just this absolute madman. Like, he was like Sam Kinison before Sam Kinison, essentially. I mean, just the stuff he would talk about was just so raunchy and so dark and so just incredible that a lot of people were like uncomfortable when he performed. But he was funny, he was smart. And years later, he went to like all the promoters in town and he said, "Great news. I do clean comedy now. So, I'm open for corporates and I can do banquets and whatever you want to do." And somebody interviewed for the book, actually, they booked him because they said, "Okay, you're clean." And they went, "Yeah, nobody told Bill that, like, yeah, you don't swear anymore, but you're also talking about like having sex with dead animals. And that's not clean comedy, Bill. Like, that doesn't, just because you didn't say the F word doesn't mean you're a clean guy." So I think that's something else that's up for debate.
Yeah. Okay. That's really great to delineate. Okay. Well, hey, since you are our guest, you would start us off, and would Wild Bill be on your list, or are you going to start off with somebody else?
I'm going to start with somebody else. Like I said,
Okay.
I don't think he makes the list of clean comics. And even though I don't want to get, I want to win because winning is the most important thing, of course. But I'm going to try to go for a theme this evening. I'm going to try to go for the theme of all Minnesota or Minnesota adjacent comics.
Awesome.
So, there's one I'm going to leave off the list, and if you guys choose to take it, by all means, but I'm going to leave Louis Anderson off the list intentionally. As Louis passed away just a couple of months ago. And I feel like, picking Louis for this list to me is like coming up with your starting five for an all-star team and being like, okay, well, I get Michael Jordan first. And it's like, well, everybody's going to get Jordan first. Like, it's too easy. So to me, Louis Anderson is probably the greatest all-time clean comedian. He's influenced so many people. He's so funny. He's so good. So for that reason alone, I decided, let's keep it interesting. I'm going to keep Louis off my list. So he kind of gets he's the Lifetime Achievement Award. But to your question, Jeff, my first one tonight, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take a big bite out of everybody's. And I'm going to say my first one is going to be Mitch Hedberg. Mitch Hedberg is my first pick.
Nice.
Clean comic. And this is where I feel like we get into the debate about like, what is clean comedy? when you think about Mitch Hedberg, I think everybody thinks about, everybody has these great one-liners they love, but you always kind of have this in your mind. You don't think of him as a clean comic because there was so much drug talk. There was so much, there was so many nuances in his comedy that if you weren't an adult, you didn't get, but he never said anything that was filthy. You aren't going to go back and find a Mitch Hedberg set where he's swearing and where he's talking about all sorts of just like horrible, nasty things. So to me, I think that, nobody has done, in my opinion, one-liner comedy better. So I'm going Mitch Hedberg as my first pick.
Cool. That's a great, first outing there. The lines, if you think of clean in terms of kind of concepts, the guy who says, I used to do drugs, I still do drugs, but I used to also. It's probably not the one you're going to sit down with your kids and listen to, but yeah, totally. And I think him killing on late night shows is evidenced by maybe that dual nature that he has, where we know he's not using expletives, but we know he's probably not going to be daycare provider of the year either. That dude. Yeah. Cool. Great outing. So Richard and Michael, what are your first choices?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go first. I'll go first for our team. And when we brought up the topic, I started thinking about comedians that I watched with my family when I was a kid. So this would have been in the early to mid 80s. And the two stand-up comedians that I remember watching with the family and it being like a big, like, hey, we rented the VHS from RJ Video and we brought it home. The two I remember were Bill Cosby and Gallagher. We're not going to talk about Bill Cosby. It's a fun show. And right now there's not a lot of fun things to talk about with Bill Cosby. We can talk about Gallagher, who is, in his own way, possibly as not great of a person as Bill Cosby, but just in a less harmful sort of way. And I think part of it goes to show that that the style of comedy that you do doesn't necessarily equate to the type of person you are. Right. I mean, Gallagher, when he tried to reinvent himself as this like Dane Cook kind of very misogynistic jokes and very raunchy types of jokes, and famously got into it with Mark Maron on the WTF podcast and stormed off when Mark Maron called him out on it. And the other thing is just there are a lot of comedy bits that I remember from a kid, like watching Monty Python, that obviously still hold up today. But there's some stuff that when you're younger, like Gallagher just hits. I mean, he's got a giant, he's literally hits. He's got a giant sledgehammer and he's smashing things.
Yeah, for being a clean comedian, he certainly does require you to cover yourself with a tarp.
Quite a bit of cleanup is involved. I mean, he's got a giant couch that's a trampoline that he can jump on.
Yeah,
that has giant coins stuck in the couches. That's funny when you're like 8 or 10.
I think he also had a lot of like just these sorts of kind of almost kid-friendly, naive kind of ponderisms that made you felt like you could get it at no matter what age. I remember him talking about like the thing that I think of most is like aside from smashing watermelons was him like pondering the concept of why buildings aren't called builts. And it was just this dumb, like, play on words, like, why are they called a building? It's done being built. Why? And it's just like the way that he would deliver like these weird things and the audience would erupt in laughter. And as a kid, I felt the same way. It's just like, yeah, why aren't they called builts?
Right. And it, to that point, it's just, a lot of his comedy was wordplay when he wasn't doing the prop stuff, like you said, Michael. It was the type of thing that for a family, it was easy for us to be able to sit down and everyone could enjoy it. It's just not and it's not to say that type of comedy, like I remember watching Jerry Seinfeld stand-up specials with my parents, and you could put Seinfeld on there. I don't remember him really using swear words that much certainly in his earlier stuff. I don't know. I haven't seen him do stand-up lately. But you can work that style and be really funny But you look back on someone like Gallagher, who I thought was really funny when I was 10, doesn't hold up today.
Do we all know that he licensed his act to his brother, who is nearly his lookalike?
Gallagher too.
Yeah. And
Yes.
he wanted, I think, to play smaller venues, or I think Gallagher had graduated to theaters. And I think Gallagher too, his brother, was licensing his act to play in smaller venues, and then just stopped paying his older brother. And so I think Gallagher 1 had a cease and desist against Gallagher 2, who had stopped even adding the 2 on the posters for his appearances. So
yeah, Jeff, this isn't going to help with our scoring, but our second choice is Gallagher 2.
Oh, is it really?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go with Patrick's second choice. What is that, sir?
All right, last one. I guess my next one here. I'm gonna fast forward. And I'm gonna go to somebody who's current, who's a little bit more in the present. And if you guys aren't familiar with her, I'll tell you a really quick story. I'll try not to dominate this conversation too much. There's a woman she was out of Minneapolis. Her name's Andy Erickson, and she moved out to LA. Gosh, probably 6-7 years ago. She was like the runner-up on, I think, 2015 season of Last Comic Standing. So she was like second to last. So she did the whole casino and theater tour with those guys. She was on that John Stamos and Jamie Lee Curtis show, that Scream Queens, that was out a few years ago. That was kind of like the horror comedy series they did for Fox. So she was a lead on that. So she's had a really big career, and she's super funny. She's wild. I mean, if you watch this girl, again, very, very goofy, very surrealist, very into unicorns and Pokemons and things like that. The reason I want to pick her, and this is my quick side story for you guys. So, I wrote this book about comedy. I've covered the comedy scene in Minnesota for years, but once upon a time, many, many years ago, back in 2007, I had this big moment where I was like, I'm going to be a stand-up comic. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for real. The world is going to hear the comedy stylings of Patrick Strait. And so I went down to our big famous club in town. It's Acme Comedy Company. And I went down there and I was all ready. And I was like, okay, signed up for open mic and I'm ready to do it. And the thing with the open mic at Acme is if you put a little star next to your name your first time, you get up for sure. So I'm looking at the list and there's like 3 people before me and we're all first timers. So I have that like megalomaniac confidence of like, I'm just going to blow the roof off. The person who goes right before me is Andy Erickson. And Andy Erickson gets up there and I stand by the statement. Go out, find her on YouTube, do whatever you got to do to find her, listen to her albums. She's got a Dry Bar special, all this stuff. She killed harder in 3 minutes than I've seen established headline theater arena comics do in an entire hour-long set. I mean, she destroyed that place to the point that like people wanted her to keep going. Like people were genuinely trying to see if they could get it so she could go back up and do more jokes. And then it was time for the comedy of Patrick's. And, I don't remember exactly how I did, but one of us has made a major career in acting and comedy, and one of us writes about major careers in acting. So there you go. So that's my sentimental pick. My local pick is a woman named Andy Erickson. Check her out. She's definitely worth your time, I promise.
Okay, Richard and Michael, what is your second choice?
Our second choice, and it's less of a person and more of a concept. So I hope I don't get booed off stage for this, but
Kanye West.
It's Donda. It is corporate comedians, just the entire schmear of dedicating your life to becoming a comedian or being restricted within your kind of comedic realm to going up and kind of performing a more company friendly set in front of a bunch of people who don't really care.
Yeah.
Being able to go up there and be funny enough to entertain, but also probably be forgettable, but not to the person who booked you because you want to get booked back again. And it must be such a fine line to kind of live in that world of kind of corporate comedy where you are being hired to I'm thinking of people though that must be different when you're like booked for like a super big company or like an entertainment company. a Disney or like a Fox or whoever for a big corporate event. That must they probably pull in someone from their stable of entertainers that they work with normally. But I'm thinking of, let's say a law firm is having like a retreat or just a big
a printer company.
A big printer company. Does Richard, do you have some experience?
No, it's just something that came in mind.
Jeff, as the former mayor of Burbank, as you have been styled, I assume that you would have gotten up and when you're introducing people, that you've had the same sort of like, oh, well, this is here's the band that might not be very good, but you can't quite say that.
Yeah. Patrick, where were we going?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's a good pick because I also feel like corporate gigs, you have a better chance, I feel like, if you're kind of like, of being heckled. And the reason I think that is because, like, think about the guy who's had 3 drinks. He knows everybody in the room. And like, he is that confidence, that liquid confidence where I'm funnier than this guy. Yeah. I'm the guy in the office who's funny. And now he's going to try to take over, like if you don't know anybody in the comedy club, you're going to shut up probably. But I feel like you might run into some of those. You got to really be on your game to tackle, Hal from accounting here.
That's a funny observation. So cool. Chalk one up for corporate comedians or down against them. We're at a halftime and want to ask you to go out wherever find a literature is sold and find Patrick Strait's book. His last name is spelled Striait. So lose the G and the H. And Patrick Strait, please remind folks again what's the title of the book.
Yeah, it's called The Funny Thing About Minnesota. It's the rise, fall, and rebirth of Twin Cities comedy. But you can just look for Funny Thing About Minnesota. And it's available, like I said, on Amazon, all major book retailers. If you're from the Minnesota area, it's in all bookstores. So yeah, check it out.
Cool. So we're also going to ask you if you're going to go Google something else, Google Mount Rushmore podcast. And you may land on our website where we have an archive of past episodes. You could search comedy and find any time that we've talked about that, and it's actually been tagged by the web host who are the webmaster, who is me. I would also say it's an award-winning website because the internet service provider informed us we had more malware on our site than any other site they've ever had. So
we did it, everyone.
We did it.
Mission accomplished. I've got a giant banner right behind me.
Yeah. So we did that. So we're almost kind of like the Ron Jeremy of websites. So that's
no, Jeff. No.
Ew. But you could also at that site or on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter suggest a topic for a future Mount Rushmore podcast. Other folks who have done that have ended up being on the podcast, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, we are now in our 6th season, and we hope to do many, many more seasons, which means many opportunities for topics that are suggested by our listeners and supporters. And with that, I think we're going to settle down into our 3rd round and going to ask Patrick Strait to let us know who his 3rd choice for clean comedy is.
Sounds good. No, I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, my 3rd choice. I'm going to go with somebody who she's originally Minnesota, but she is now much more of an LA comic. I'm going to go with a woman named Jackie Cation, who a lot of people know. Her podcast, The Dork Forest, which is a big deal. Her and Lori Kilmartin have a podcast, The Jackie and Lori Show. She's another one who, I've had the opportunity to get to know because she's originally from Minnesota. I talk about her in the book a little bit because she was really cutting her teeth out here during kind of the big comedy boom of like the mid to late 80s, right before, kind of the bubble burst. And the cool thing about Jackie is, and again, I'm sure there's probably a recording or a podcast out there of her slipping or saying something she's not supposed to. Saying the F word or something, but she really, she knows her audience and she sticks to it, whether she's talking about her marriage, she talks about a lot of dork stuff. And I say that in the nicest way. Like, I didn't know what Horcruxes were until I saw Jackie's set. It's She absolutely, she knows who her nerds are out there who are listening, but just very funny. And at the same time, not necessarily, to use the comparison to Gallagher, which is a bad comparison to begin with, but thing where her material stands up over the test of time. You know what I mean? Like, you can listen to stuff that's 15 years old now, and it's just as funny as it was 15 years ago. So she is my Minnesota adjacent pick for number 3.
Oh, cool. Jackie's awesome. Jackie did I'm sorry, I'm not trying to drop names, but Jackie was kind enough to do a show we had in a parking lot out in Burbank. And there were so many during the pandemic, at least towards the end, too, of parking lot shows and things that were outdoors, but in not just to I think develop material in a smaller venue, but actually to support smaller shows. Jackie has been super duper doing that, because she knows she's not Seinfeld, but she knows she's got a name that'll put a few butts in seats, and so she's
Absolutely.
very generous to do that. So who's your third?
I haven't heard her stand up, but I know she's been a guest on a ton of podcasts, and one of my favorites, Star Wars Minute. She's been on there quite. Oh yeah,
that's
times.
Right up her alley. Absolutely.
Yes, really. She's always a great guest. Good choice.
All right, Richard Michael, what's your third?
All right, so my third choice, or our third choice. I was working at a company mid 2000s, about 2005 probably, and we were in Las Vegas for a trade show. And our boss said there's about 5 or 6 of us who went. And he said, you know what? Wednesday night, we're going to go out to a nice dinner. Then I'm going to take everyone out to a Vegas show. And I'm thinking, great, maybe we'll go see Penn and Teller or Blue Man Group, or, if I could dream to dream, maybe Wayne Newton. And day of the show, I hadn't heard who it was. And day of the show, he gets into the hall. He's like, all right, so I got us tickets. We're going to see Rita Rudner. And I don't know if you could see my face fall when I heard that. I was like, oh no, really? Because I only knew Rita Rudner from like 2 things I knew her from. One is the movie Peter's Friends, which I actually liked, that she co-wrote, which should have been a good sign. But then like her little bits of stand-up comedy that I had seen, like on the old Comedy Central when they would run little, stand-up clips and things like that. And so I went into it with very low expectations. And it was one of the funniest shows I have ever seen a comedian do. Just great observational humor, the timing, because, Rita Rudner's kind of got this very kind of far away voice. And for the stuff that she does, it just absolutely works. And she doesn't work dirty. It's very clean kind of comedy. Even when she's talking about her relationship with her husband, she kind of still keeps it very PG. And I don't know. It was one of those examples where I thought I was going, I thought going into it, I was going to get a very bland, made for Midwest kind of middle-aged housewives and their husbands type of show. And it was just a great show.
Yeah, she's awesome. I think she also forewalled that show. I know she was at New York, and Rita's is in a lot, unfortunately, comics who are not male often have to do a lot more marketing, do a lot of more put themselves out more. And I think Rita actually paid for the theater, booked herself into that pretty much. So, but with the confidence, knowing that she can kill, and that she can fill the theater, and that there is this is another angle on that, really interesting on the topic that's interesting, is Las Vegas isn't necessarily perceived. It's called Sin City for a reason, so yeah. People don't expect necessarily a clean experience in that city, much less see a stand-up set that's family friendly, so or just not filthy. So
yeah, no, I was, like I said, I was pleasantly surprised, and I've gained a new appreciation for her work, and kind of goes to show you shouldn't judge something. It was kind of a judging a book by the cover sort of thing on my end.
All right, Patrick.
One thing I do want to hang on, Jeff. There's one thing I do want to say, and this kind of ties back to corporate comedians, and it ties into what you're saying here about women kind of having a little bit more of an uphill battle. I know a comic out here named Tiffany Norton, she's a corporate comic. She does a lot of big ones. And she, not that long ago, keep in mind, this is Minnesota, where I don't know if you guys heard, but there's not great police relations out here. And she got booked to do a big police banquet. And she gets up on stage. She's almost completely clean. Every once in a while, she'll get a little bit on the line, but she gets up there. First joke out of her mouth is she just goes, wow, I'm so proud to be at this cop banquet. I was gonna record my set tonight, but I heard you guys don't like to be recorded, so I guess that. So she just went for the throat, right? And she said that they actually had a good sense of humor about it. She said that they laughed, and she was like, she didn't belabor the point and beat it down. But I think you're right. You know what I mean, Jeff? I do think that a lot of times corporate comics probably look to like, oh, women, they're going to talk about how tough it is having kids and being. And she showed them she could hang with this group of, I'm not going to say intoxicated because I'm sure police would never get
no, not at all.
But she held her own. So credit to Tiffany.
That's awesome. All right. So I'm going to warn Michael and Richard that you got an uphill battle here because Patrick's had some really great choices. Mitch Hedberg, Andy Erickson, Jackie Cation, and let me just say he's already in the lead, and he's probably going to come out with his closer, his big closer here, if his choices are shaped like a comedy set. So, what's your final choice, Patrick?
Absolutely, Jeff. You were going to know this name, and we could go on. We could do a whole separate podcast about this person. We could do a whole Mount Rushmore of this person. But it's my final pick. Is going to be Minnesota comedy legend Fancy Ray McCloney. Is my grand finale pick.
The best looking man in showbiz.
The best looking man in comedy. The chocolate orchid. He's 1,000 nicknames for himself. If you have been alive in or around the state of Minnesota in the last 30, 40 years, if you own a TV, if you have a friend who owns a TV, out on the street when it's above 60 degrees, you know who Fancy Ray is. Man is a legend of Minnesota. I think it goes Prince and Fancy Ray. And
I'm looking at a picture of him right now, and he kind of looks like if Prince and Little Richard had a baby.
Yeah. Self-styled.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And you know what the funny thing is? You're probably looking at a picture of him from the 80s. He looks like that now. Today, the same hair, the same chains, the whole Fancy Ray is still doing.
I think when I moved to Minnesota in 98 or I forget what year it was, Jesse the Body Ventura was elected as the governor. And I remember people asking, like, is it crazy to have him as your governor? I said he was not the most flamboyant person on the ticket because I think Fancy Ray and Fancy Ray's mom were running against him that year.
Yes, that definitely. I mean, Fancy Ray. Real quick history lesson. I won't get long-winded, but so for those who don't know, Fancy Ray started doing stand-up in Minnesota in the 80s. And, he really was this flamboyant character that we're all talking about. He was doing the rhymes on stage. He had the look of Little Richard. But he was also just such a big personality that he started his own public access show in Minnesota called Get Down with Fancy Ray. And it became like a real legitimate entertainment entity in Minnesota. I mean, he had Little Richard himself was a guest. Prince was a guest on this show. He had all these A-list celebrities who would come to town, and nobody knew how Fancy Ray was doing it, but he was getting these A-list celebrities to sit down and talk to Kirby Puckett right around the time of the 91 World Series. He was the biggest athlete in the world. And the funny thing is, no matter who went on his show, Fancy Ray was still the star of the show. And he wanted to become he was a pitchman. He's still a pitchman. For everything from solo meets in Minneapolis to, dry cleaners to sex shops to you name it, Fancy Ray will sell it to you. And truly one of the nicest guys too. He's still Fancy Ray for being around as long as he has, and for being such a legend. He's another guy who had the privilege of talking to for this book and hearing some of his stories about the old days, and even hearing some of his stories about overcoming some of the, not that racism is not still a major issue, but overcoming some of the racial issues he had to deal with doing comedy in like the 80s and going to these little small towns in Minnesota where, they weren't really excited to have a black guy in town, period. And then you'd get Fancy Ray who'd show up and he'd have the butter curls and he'd have lipstick on sometimes. So he really was putting it in their face, and he was unapologetically him. And the thing I was going to say is he is still doing it. He's still hitting open mics. He's still doing shows in Minnesota. And, he's one of those guys who gets credit, but I think that he's one of those ones who never will get the credit he fully deserves, unfortunately, until we no longer have a Fancy Ray. And then we're all going to remember, just how great it was to have him. At least if you're from Minnesota, you could at least pass through. So the best looking man in comedy, Fancy Ray. That's my fourth pick. Put him on the map.
Well, that's a great pick. And I will echo Patrick's sentiment of Google Fancy Ray. And I will say that even though he maybe like Hedberg, he is somebody who presents when I saw him, a clean set, but he absolutely exudes sexuality. So he, like you said, the dichotomy there is just because there are no expletives doesn't mean that there isn't a kind of a vibe going down. But yeah, Fancy Ray is super cool. So great choice. All right, Richard and Michael, good luck. That's all I gotta say to you. What's your last choice?
Okay, well, from Fancy Ray McClooney, we're going to go to most average Ray Romano, who I grew up watching him as not him, but a squiggle vision version of him on a Dr. Katz Family Therapist, when he was just like this cartoon voice, kind of griping on the kind of pangs of like married life and raising twins and telling jokes about candy. And I think he kind of parlayed that into a career of being a sitcom dad and a talking woolly mammoth and other such things, but not being anything too edgy or anything. And I think that's somehow that turned into my image of him as a comedian going forward.
That is an interesting observation. I think the connection between exploring alternate scenarios for your comedy other than, say, your sex life, talking about parenting, talking about family, and that seems like the shortcut that a lot of comics at the time were taking to try to get that sitcom, was essentially using your comedy set to describe this appealing scenario with an unending number of funny situations to get into. And Romano definitely did that really well. Like Dave Attell in his stand-up set, he talks about sex a lot, or sexual things, and he uses expletives. But yeah, he was also on Dr. Katz, but he didn't get a sitcom out of it. He got his own type of show, Insomniac. And
Ray Romano is kind of like reverse Bob Saget, where Bob Saget's stand-up and his like on the stage kind of outlet was to be kind of a very blue comedian, but his kind of on-screen persona, at least on Full House and America's Funniest Home Videos, was very clean. And it was kind of like the reverse. It was like you'd kind of find out that Bob Saget actually worked really blue and was really raunchy on stage versus like just the clean-cut dad persona he portrayed.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting thing to find out, that Clark Kent is filthy, but Superman is. Well, I want to thank our guest Patrick Strait for coming in and just myrtleizing on you fools. So he killed, and you guys had to follow him. So I want to appreciate the fact that he wrote this amazing book profiling the comics who might be in a region that's kind of overlooked because it's in flyover territory between LA and New York. And before we make some selections, Patrick, could you, I know you reminded us, but we have a short-term memory type of audience. So could you let us know again where people can get your book?
Not a problem. Yeah. Funny thing about Minnesota, it's about the rise and fall and rebirth of Twin Cities comedy. And, I'll do a quick shill, Jeff. Basically, you said it's kind of a flyover, but I think Minnesota is one of those markets when you actually start to kind of drill down, and, I subtly kind of did a little bit of that with my choices tonight. But I mean, there's so many incredible talents that came from Minnesota, and you still hear comics talking about Minnesota as such an incredible comedy town, whether that is, the Mitch Hedbergs and the Nick Swardsons and the, Jackie Cations we talked about, all the way down to the originals, like, Louis Anderson and Scott Hansen and, these big names who really were creating comedy without a roadmap. When these guys got started in the late 70s, early 80s, you had New York, you had California, but you really didn't have a lot of stand-up scenes between those two. So the fact that Minnesota's become such an incredible, thriving scene without, having all that long kind of performing history, whether that's, the, music scene, acting, things like this, I think is a really incredible testament. So hopefully, even if you're not a Minnesota person, I really think, there's a lot of stories in this book and a lot of people who passed through here before they became a big deal. There's some really funny stuff I learned about Jay Leno when he used to perform out here. Jerry Seinfeld, some of the folks that we've talked about here today, there's no mention of Gallagher, although that's a whole other book for a whole other day. But yeah, so to your original question, Jeff, the funny thing about Minnesota, it's from the Minnesota Historical Society Press. You can get it online and, Amazon, you can get it at pretty much any major bookseller's website, Barnes and Noble, things like that. If you're in or around the Minnesota area, stop by the Historical Society Museum, pick it up there, pick it up in any local bookstore, get it on your Kindle, your whatever you're reading, man. It's out there. So hopefully you'll check it out. And if you're a comedy fan, I think you'll enjoy it. And if you're a casual comedy fan, I think you'll learn a lot. I think you'll enjoy it too. So there you go. There's
awesome.
Bitter shill for you.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, so when we pick our Mount Rushmore here, why don't we go with some Minnesota folks? So let's go with the amazing Andy Erickson, awesome Jackie Cation, the fabulous fancy Ray McCloney. And because she has been a pioneer in comedy, and Richard and Michael deserve to have 1 point up on the board, let's go with Rita Rudner.
Oh.
So yeah, and y'all pick some R's. We got Rita Rudner, Ray Romano. So that's kind of funny.
Fancy Ray.
Fancy Ray. That's right.
It's true.
Yeah. All
Real
right.
theme episode this week. By the way, I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to interrupt you.
Late on us.
First thing, I did really appreciate you guys letting me come on here, but I had to know, so I looked it up here. The reason why Gallagher sued Gallagher 2, because he told Gallagher 2 he couldn't do the Sledge-O-Matic. Can you remember any bits from Gallagher besides Sledge-O-Matic? He took the only thing he had away from him.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
He tells Gallagher, you can have the hat with the hair attached to it, and that's it.
It's like, you can have my controversial opinions about interracial marriage.
Yeah.
Not happening, bud.
That's so funny. The unknown comic sells his act, but no paper bags. You have to do it without. Thank you so much for your time, Patrick. We appreciate it. And we're going to sign off. This has been the Mount Rushmore of Clean Comedy. I'm always Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.
Awesome. Patrick, thank you guys so much for having me.